Welcome again, Ham Radio Perspectives. I'm Quin, K8QS.
I'm Tom, W89TDD.
So, Tom, one of the great things in the hobby is giving and receiving signal reports. And boy, oh boy, has a lot changed since we've gotten into the hobby, even back before that. But this is going to be fun because we all need signal reports. We need them for antenna testing. We need them in the QSO to determine whether or not we've got enough power or we're running too much power. We can cut it back. We need it to determine whether or not our antennas are in the right direction, if we've got a rotor. And so on, signal reports are really, really important part of the hobby. And we tend to use S-meter readings as quote unquote signal reports. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Is that the best thing to do? What are the limitations? To what extent is it okay? So, Tom, you mentioned something to me really interesting about this, and I'd completely forgotten about it. And that is the old system that we used to have when we were doing SWLs, right?
Right, that's the old SINPO, SINPO system. And we used to use that as a way of giving signal reports to foreign broadcast stations, BBC, Radio Moscow, Radio Cuba, so on and so forth. And in return, we got a QSL card from them. So this was used mostly by shortwave listeners, but it's a lot more detailed than the old 599 reports that you get all the time on ham radio.
Yeah, what's interesting about it is it shows those 5 categories for signal reports. The strength, the interference, the noise or static, propagation, fading, QSB we talk about and all, and the overall quality, SINPO. So that was fun that you brought me back to that. I really appreciate it. It was a good system, and it worked well, and I kind of miss it, and we don't get into some of those nuances today in the hobby. But here's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, Tom, and that is the origin of the RST. I'll let you say more about RST in just a minute, but the R, S, and T, and then of course the T is for tone, so we take that off when we're doing phone work, sideband, whatever. But in CW, that tone is important. I remember in the 60s and early 70s when I would be on CW at night on 40 meters, and I would often work Cuban stations. And apparently the electrical grid in Cuba had some problems. So you'd work a Cuban station, it would be, it sounded, you could hear the ripple. And so you'd figure out what to do with that T, but that's hardly an issue anymore. Everybody is a 9 in terms of the tone.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, here's the interesting point. Many operators don't know the RST stands for readability, strength, which is your signal strength, and tone, or the RS system that you're using mostly on voice, based on S-meter readings. Early radios didn't have S meters, strength meters, signal strength meters, and many QRP rigs don't have such meters today. So the code was developed in 1934 by a ham radio operator, Arthur W. Bratton, WTBSR.
W2. BSR, yeah. So he developed that already in 34. So basically we're talking about something that came out of CW and there were not S meters. So you'd use the RST. And it was for CW, of course, with that tone portion of it. Now, before we get into the limits of using an S meter, let's take a look at the actual meanings behind the R and the S that most people don't really know. And so, first of all, let's look at the readability. So this is what it's supposed to mean, that R portion. It's actually in words. We're not talking about an S meter or anything. Unreadable would be a 1. If it's unreadable, I don't know why you'd even be in a contact. Barely readable, readable with difficulty, readable with practically no difficulty, and then perfectly readable. That's what that 5 is. And then, Tom, let's look at the signal strength. So up to 9, of course, you say 5, 9. So faint, very weak, weak, fair, fairly good, good signals, moderately strong, strong, and extremely strong. So that 9 is supposed to be limited to extremely strong. And whether or not we do that or not is a different question. So that's where that came from. And it's, you could think about it as a way of developing some language around a system of numbers, and without an S meter even being part of it, Tom.
Right. And that definition still, it makes a lot of sense because S meters are not an objective way to measure someone's signal strength. And with sideband signals, they bounce around anyway. We're talking about an average strength level. Some hands will say your signal is varying from S5 to S7, for instance, or peaking at S7.
Right. And so even two rigs, here's we get into the difficulty, even with two rigs from the same brand, the S meters might not read the same level with the same level of signal coming in. So we're talking S meters, unless you get into really expensive receiving gear and all, S meters are a bit unreliable. They're not, we could say, objective. They are variable in how they work. So what should we do about that, Tom?
Well, even though they are more subjective than objective, how are those measurements relative to other models and makes of receivers? And what about LED meters? Noise levels, RF gain, preamps, noise suppressors, etc. It's all subjective based on your particular piece of equipment and your antenna system.
Give me the old AM radio days, Tom. 10 meters AM, and that meter would go brrr when the guy would turn his station on, the transmitter on, and it might vary a little bit, but it gave you some sense of what that signal was. And we began with the S meters, of course, reporting on AM and believing that that was a good way to go. But then today you look at it and you say, how really subjective is it? You look at the contesters where they do the rubber stamping, boom, boom, boom. Everybody's a 5.9 because you want to be able to copy the signal report easily. So they just say 5.9, 5.9, 5.9, and that becomes meaningless. Tom, I think we need something more.
You're right. Well, we need to report like the old armchair copy, old man. The phrase highlights relaxed, high-quality audio experience as if the person speaking is in the same room with you, and allows the listener to sit back comfortably in an armchair, and it would presume an S9 signal. Actually, it could reflect anywhere between an S7 and S9.
Yeah, armchair copy, that's a great term. And of course, it goes way, way back. It means you could sit back and not have to worry about focusing too closely on someone to make out their signal. It goes back to the intent behind S meters to have a universal signal measurement. That'd be a universal exclamation mark, armchair copy. So what they did with the S meters was set them up so that an S unit is supposedly 6 dB of audio gain. So S1, S2, S3, each of those 6 dB. And then we have the alleged or subjective dB over S9. So it would be S9, let's say you're 1 S unit above S9, that would be 6 dB. But we start saying it differently. So we go up to S9 and then we say you're 10 over S9 or 20 or 15 or whatever you think you can read on that meter, which is, pretty subjective. They're officially supposed to represent minus 73 dB or 50 microvolts at the antenna terminal for S9. But in fact, S meters do not measure absolute strength, only relative strength. That's the key thing about S meters. And so there's all the subjectivity. And so maybe the best thing that can be said, Tom, then is this relative sense. If you're listening to somebody's signal and you see on your meter they go from S7 to S8 in a relative sense. You say, well, that's about one S unit, so that's about 6 dB. And all right, so we're making some progress when we look at S meter as relative.
All right. And the OTA folks who are doing this as well as we can with S meters are great. They are contrarians. They require a real report. It's in the rules.
Yeah, isn't that stunning, Tom? That when you go out on these expeditions with your OTA gang and you hold court somewhere at a picnic table in a park, and the rules are give accurate signal reports. Now, of course, they're using S meters, or if they don't trust their S meter, they're doing it the best they can based on the verbal descriptions of it. So it's still mostly based on loosey-goosey S meters, but it's not the regular contest rubber stamping. And the activators of these parks on the air and the like really want to know how they're getting out in portable settings. So the problem with the system then we've discussed here, there are all kinds of things that hams do to add to this beyond what the S meter tells them, such as QRN for Nancy, QR Mary for man-made interference and the like. So we add on, which is not bad, or we'll say you've got a lot of QSB, your signal's going up and down. So we add these things to the reports as well. It's not just signal strength report.
No, but the point is that we should do a bit of signal assessment before throwing out reports based on, rubber stamping 5x9 or over dependence on S meters. Like you say, base it on armchair copy. There's some QSB on your signal, a little bit of flutter, some background noise, yada, yada, yada. That should be sufficient. And it's more, I would say that's more objective than throwing out a subjective number based on some little meter on your receiver.
Yeah, or the horrors of it being an LED series of LED lights. Those are really hard to figure out. I like waiting in a QSO on sideband, Tom, until the second round to give a loggable or definitive report. So on the first one, I'll say, well, you're somewhere around 5x7, but I'll give you a report for the log on the next go around. No, I do, because I want to take a quick look at it. When they were first calling me, I may have been writing some stuff down or typing it in the computer and not really have a good sense. And then I can concentrate on that second round when they're talking a little bit longer. I might say, if I'm on 10 meters, hey, you were just 5'7" when you called me, and now you're gone, buddy. You're gone. That's the way 10 meters go.
Yeah, if there is a next round, the guy might disappear into the meantime into the ether.
Right. So these are just some things to think about. Let's give honest reports. Let's have some fun with it, and let's help each other with these honest reports, and both in terms of the strength of the signal and also the quality of the audio or the quality of the CW. Now, I know you guys that are doing the digital stuff don't have any problem with this because it's kind of built in to the way the software works. And if only you could figure out a way to do that in sideband, or maybe somebody has. But we appreciate you watching. Please subscribe to the channel. We're Ham Radio Perspectives. I'm Quin, K8QS.
And I'm Tom, WA9TDD.
Keep giving those signal reports and be honest.